doing door to door and like, yeah, we're coming out, and you're like, okay, and then you see them actually show up and ask you questions and that sort of stuff, you know. Those sort of shifts, you know, change in society.
Oh man,
Changed society.
Well, welcome to the Link Up podcast. We are short of staff today. Vic has gone on vacation to Southeast Asia for the rest of the election season. So if you want to hit up your boy, you know, wish him well, send him some DMs and ask him bring back some sake or something like that for me, please. This is the Before the Ballot series, I think I like to call it. It's that, but it's okay. And with us in studio, I would like to welcome a candidate for West Bay North, Mr. Rolston Anglin, better known, or probably, you know, very much better known as Rolly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and showing us some love here. We do appreciate the fact that, you know, the candidates have expressed interest into our platform and are willing to come visit us and lend their voice to our audience. So I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you and have a conversation.
Well, I mean, first, I'd like to thank you guys for providing this sort of forum, right? Because when we were off air just now, I started off with, you know, giving you all a couple of snippets, but, you know, growing up when I did, and now at 53, a lot of younger people, I'm sure, look at me and think I'm very, very old. Whereas my first term running, I was 28.
I was going to ask you about that. You were first elected in 2000, right?
Yeah,
and one of the youngest to be elected, I think John McLean got you beat.
And
right?
Truman Bodden.
And Truman? Okay.
Yeah.
Because John McLean, I think, was like 24 or something like that when he got elected.
Yes.
I don't know how old True was, but
right around the same age.
Okay.
Yeah, they were both super young.
So I just wanted to ask, since we talked about you being 28 when you're elected, before that, I think it's fairly well known. Maybe not to our younger audience, but you were in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Right. You were an accountant.
Yeah.
What kind of steered your life to getting into the field of accounting?
Well, you know, if we go back just two little steps, right? For me, growing up in Cayman and going through what I like to call that first technological quote unquote revolution, right? Growing up,
which would have been around when?
The 1980s.
Okay.
Right. You don't have a lot of TVs. Most homes did not have a TV. Most homes did not have a telephone, right? So growing up, and you got to go over to your uncle's house to get a call from your aunt or uncle from calling from Tampa and calling from overseas, and then you get that first telephone in the house. Growing up in that era and watching my parents, especially my mother, try to make heads or tails of Atari, Nintendo, and breakdancing.
That's what you were into, breakdancing back in the day?
That's what I was into, right?
Okay.
And so, you know, when you grow up and you go through all those sorts of experiences, and then you negotiate the deal with your mother that, yeah, she could let you're the baby in the family, but she could let you go out a couple of times and do things, keep the grades up, and then you can do all of that other stuff, you know, the break dancing and going out with, dressed in a way that I'm sure for her was absolutely shocking, right?
Oh, my mother hated the way I dressed when I was a teenager.
I mean,
she couldn't stand it.
The colors and, you know, going out with the high tops because you got to do a show that night, and for us a show was, you know, people.
You got Sharenos or dancing?
you laugh, but that was the Sharenos was one of the spots.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Sharenos was one of the spots. You know, they had the skating rink there.
Yeah.
A lot. That was a popular place for teenage Christmas birthday parties, and so a lot of times the other kids would ask a certain breakdancing troupe or the other to come and perform for their birthday party.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was.
So you guys were like a little the first original entertainment ring or circle or group.
Yeah, so let me not try to take any load of credit though. There was a all of that happened at the same time, but there was a bunch of bigger guys, older guys that were the real masters of the craft.
Okay.
We were a little bit younger, so we were about a year from being really, really good, right? So that time and performing at the Children's Festival of the Arts, and I can see those teachers' faces now, right? Because picture Cayman in the 80s. Recitations, poems, traditional music, and then all of a sudden you get these two groups come in there break dancing at the NCFA. It's different. It was wild, right? It was wild, and then going along with that was liking the first wave of rap music, right? Liking Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, Curtis Blow, and all those guys were like our heroes, right? And so, again, coming from Cayman, that is a calypso, country music, reggae music, conservative society. All of a sudden, all these big changes start to happen where video games becomes a thing. Breakdancing becomes a big thing for teenagers to do. Living through that was interesting. And then, going off to university, again, you didn't have a lot of that happening, right, in families. And so...
Was it always in you to go to university? Was that like your path all the time?
Yeah.
High school?
Oh, yeah. My father's a seaman who used to read Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, the Miami Herald. Anything he could get his hands on, he used to read to keep up with what was happening in the world. He pounded it into my head from a very early age that you got to go to school. Like he sailed and he saw that upward mobility was about becoming educated.
Right.
And so I didn't grow up in a home where going to college was this choice. So whilst none of my parents lived through a time where they could do it, they saw that was the future, and they ensured that they instilled that in me. You're going to university, right? And so for me, it wasn't even a choice. It was just about get the grades. You can do the breakdancing. You can play the video games. You can listen to the rap music. You can mix tapes and sell them and all the sorts of great things that we used to do back then as teenagers. But the grades got to be kept up because you're going to university.
Okay.
And so, you go living through that and looking on. To answer your question directly, for me, I always thought I would want to get involved with politics from the time I was a small boy.
Why was that?
I used to hear the way that my family spoke about the late Jim Bodden. And so despite the fact that Caymanians kind of sometimes give versions of history that miss out certain small little pieces. So you used to hear this thing about, we never had parties. Yeah, parties died in the 1950s, way before I was born. And so when I came along, they had teams. But people
I remember teams. I remember my parents taking me to a meeting where the First Caribbean building is now, but that used to be Kirk Supermarket.
Plaza Supermarket, that's
and
right.
The A-team had a meeting out there. I forget, that was Miss Berna. I think
they were
Frank.
They were a subset of the national team.
Okay, yeah,
That's
I remember
right,
the A-team. Oh, Dr. Tomlinson.
That's right.
On there too.
Yeah.
But I remember going to one of the meetings.
Truman, Dr. Tomlinson, Miss Berna Murphy, and I'm forgetting who their other teammate was.
I don't know if it was Frank.
No, he wasn't. He went as an independent.
Okay.
He went as an independent, and so my family were what was called unity team, right? So they supported the unity team, and just the way I heard them talk about Mr. Jim and what he did and what he meant to Cayman, I can remember as a little boy saying, you know what? That means that he's doing something great. I never dreamt I would do it at 28. Let me be frank. Like that was never in the cards for me.
So yeah, so obviously, so you graduate from school, right? You have a accounting degree. At this time, did you then pursue the CPA?
I was already a CPA. So
so you had your CPA. You get a job. You're obviously making decent money. You must have a decent life. What then tells you want to give all up? Your career is probably just getting started. You probably have a track to being partner. Why do you want to give that up?
Yeah, I mean, so I graduated from university in '95, passed the exam, immediately went off to New York, did my 2 business seasons in New York, and I came home, right? And so at the time, you're quite right. One of the things that Price Waterhouse, now PwC, would have told me is, listen, the trajectory you're on means you have to go and work in one of the big cities, right? And I chose New York, and that was one of the more popular destinations back then. And I had politics was not on my radar at all. I always thought, get back home, make partner, mid-40s, early 50s, so like about now. Then I would be like, you know what? This would be what I would do. And unlike today, where you guys have this sort of forum, for me, it was about lunches, right? And so a bunch of
what
us
do you
young
mean by that?
Caymanians were at lunch, right? So every once in a while, the young professionals, 3, 4, 5 of us get together. We're at lunch. We're talking about all the issues that Cayman got, how we can solve the problems of the world, and all the usual stuff that young, educated people talk about. Of course, fun things too,
Yeah,
but what's
yeah,
happening
yeah.
in life and where you going
Absolutely.
Friday night. But yeah, so when we would talk about the serious things, a lot of times, we would skip over it and talk about, oh, well, we could do that later on. We could do that later on. And I had a cousin who was much older than me and really played an important part in my life as a teenager. And he came to me, he came to me one day and he's like, Raleigh, do you see what's happening in Cayman? A lot of these older guys don't get it. He's like, they're guys my age. What about your generation? What about what you all are feeling in Cayman? You ever thought about running? And I'm like, no, not now. I'm like, check me back in about 16 to 20 years time. And yeah, I would be looking at doing something like that. And one day, get home, you're a young couple, looking at the front page of the Compass, and you see a headline that talks about Cayman getting blacklisted. And I'll never forget looking on and going into the office the next day and talking to managers and partners in the office and what that means reputationally for Cayman, and whether or not government really gets it and understands it. And I just started thinking about it seriously. And then I called up a few friends and we went to lunch and we were just chatting about it. And I said, what do you think, guys? You think a few of us should do this? And they all just looked at me like I had 3 eyes, right? They're like, what? What are you talking? Do what? I'm like, run for politics. They're like, we'd never get elected. They would never, this isn't going to happen. I was like, okay. So kind of threw it out of my mind.
Were you ever scared of getting blackballed? Like, say you ran and you didn't make it, right? Because obviously you'd have to stop your job. Some jobs allow you to take a hiatus and then come back.
Yeah.
Some places like, no, you have to sever ties and go do what you gotta do.
No, I let me tell you, right? The then partners of the firm were so supportive. They thought it was a terrible idea at that age, right? They were like, Rolston, no, make partner first and then come to us and take a sabbatical, right? They're like, you're way too young. Stick around the firm. You're on a trajectory. We've invested in you. You've invested in you. Complete the mission. But when I did make up my mind that I was going to do it, and I went back to them with a final decision, they met and they came back to me, and they gave me, the type of opportunity that very few people probably get today. They allowed me to resign, so I had to advertise, but we basically did an exchange of letters where if I did not win in November of 2000, I had a week to inform them of my decision, and I had an open letter with reemployment, first business day of January 2001, with a promotion.
That
So
is extremely generous.
yeah. So it was all about them realizing at that time that, you know what, I was serious about it. I'd thought about it. I'd really, really prayed about it, and I wasn't just jumping into it. And I think that was the biggest selling point for them, was that I took months to decide from telling them initially I was thinking about it to then deciding to do it.
So when you won the election, you ran with the UDP at the time, right?
There were no parties.
But okay. But you ended up on the opposition side
So I was a
in 2000.
backbencher.
Oh,
So I was a backbencher.
You were not in opposition then.
No, I was a backbencher.
Okay, I can't remember who formed government back then. I saw a lot of progressive seats. That one, I don't remember who formed government back then.
So that was an interesting first experience of real horse trading, right? There's no parties. We had no national teams. No one had coalesced as a team across the country for the first time in decades.
Okay.
Right? From the 70s right up till 96, there were always options where there were teams who had people as candidates across the country. They run on a common manifesto. They didn't have a part of constitution and those sorts of things, but had a common manifesto, right? So like national team ran against Team Cayman in 92. I think 96 Team Cayman was still around, but certainly the national team was still around. And so, yeah, we just put together a government. It lasted 12 months. It crashed and burnt. The two parties then rose from the ashes.
Was that
out of
the
that.
one they removed the leader of government
Yes,
business?
yes.
Okay, I remember the protests in town and stuff. I was very young at that time. I would have been 16, 17.
Yeah, So I went through an indoctrination of fire in my first term, but life experiences and learning experiences that you can't buy, right? And so sat on the back bench and tried to learn as much as I could. The thing that I will say about when I fast forward to today is one of the things that I would love to see, right? Because you're talking now 25 years ago, 24 plus.
Hold on, before you fast forward though, I do have an interest in your time in that first term.
Okay.
Because I wanted to know, you went through Ivan in that first term.
Yes.
What was that like rebuilding, I guess, your constituents in West Bay and then the Greater Island back then?
Shock. I mean, the entire country was just in shock. We had not had anything like that ever happen, that type of widespread destruction. I remember to get out of West Bay to town, we had to hire a couple of guys that had backhoes who went up the old West Bay Road and cleared the way for us to get to town because we couldn't get to town otherwise. And so the entire country was just in shock. I learned about things like generators. I didn't know what a generator was before that. I mean, I heard the term, but I didn't really know what a generator was. All of a sudden, you're out of electricity for months. I didn't get electricity back personal until like November, and this happened in September the 12th, right? And so that whole rebuilding process was painful, but it really, really taught me a lot about how resilient Caymanians are. People, once everybody overcame that initial shock, it was like everybody just looked around and said, right, what do we need to do next? And sort of as a community, we just became mission oriented. Now, I must say,
what was it like working with the government during that time and rebuilding the island?
Yeah, that was just such an interesting experience because everybody's looking at that point for government to take the lead, right? Because if government had waffled, we would not have rebuilt so quickly. But government very early on took the decision that we needed to get financial services back up and running. And so we relocated SEMA into an office building that had a large generator. And we were able to get SEMA back up and running very early on, which meant to the outside world that Cayman was quote unquote open for business. Now, of course, tourism couldn't open up because of the destruction. That, along with government taking a very, very aggressive approach to the rebuild and government stepping in the gap when it came to a number of insurance companies. One insurance company was on the verge of bankruptcy. And so government took the decision to take up an option for shares with its parent company to save the company. Because if the company had crashed, that would have meant literally hundreds, if not thousands, of home-owned property owners would have been left holding the bag. Thankfully, the vast majority of other property insurance companies made it through, were backed appropriately, and they took that lead from government, because government brought in industry leaders from various sectors and said, listen, tell us what you need, tell us how we need to support you so that you can do your work to help families rebuild.
Were you ever worried that it may not happen?
Of course. I mean, not only did we go through that whole shock of that sort of destruction, I had a baby that was 4 weeks old to the day.
Damn.
She breastfed through the entire Ivan experience. So here I was at home. I got a 3+ year old who actually wanted to go out and play with a cat that was actually being blown by Ivan. Like, she was being, like, literally the cat, like, you saw the cat just go zoom, zoom. Then you saw a couple of chickens go zoom, zoom. And she was looking outside and she's like, Daddy, can we go outside and play? I see a cat. Like, no, sweetheart, we can't go outside and play, right? And then my second daughter was breastfeeding. And so just thinking back on the personal level, and then phone communication going down with all of the family and colleagues and friends, and then that long period of not knowing what was happening, and then seeing the destruction. Sure, there were times internally that you're sitting there worried, but you couldn't let the people see you sweat. We had to show that brave face as members,
right? And
we had to do what we had to do: support businesses, support industries to reopen, and actually just get back to rebuilding. And so, literally, because government took on that singular, narrowly focused rebuild and let's reopen mentality, the community just rallied and followed behind. And so, honestly, that's what made the biggest difference in my mind. Because if government had basically sat in a state of shock or in shock, everybody else would have,
right.
Well.
So after that, then the elections got pushed.
Yes.
To the following year, which would have been 2005.
Yes.
And that is when I think you then became that's your first ministerial seat, right?
No,
that wasn't it. That's still not then.
No. We got swept out of power, and that's when I became an opposition member.
Okay.
So from
there we go.
So from 2005 to 2009, I sat in opposition, and I got to tell you that I learned the most of my 3 terms. I learned the most and became the best version of a legislator during that time. Because when you sit in opposition, the government is running the show. The government has the majority. They occupy cabinet. They run the country on a day-to-day basis. And you have to sit there and try and be the government in waiting. You need to show the public why you have better ideas and can run the country in a better fashion. So literally, you're sitting down at what was called the House those days, now they call it Parliament. You're literally sitting down there on budget day, waiting for the budget documents to come out. That's the first time you're seeing it. The government is seeing it because they prepare it. It's their budget. And then, of course, you got to go and show why you should be the government by looking on at their policy positions and saying, yeah, this is what they're doing, but this is what we would do if we were there. Moving motions that a lot of times aren't going to get accepted, but you're doing it because you have to show the country why you should be the government.
So do you think that's what swung the election the next way in 2009?
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, we just put in a lot of hard work. I'll never forget. We had a split in the party along one specific position: how you vote during a budget. And so a lot of my colleagues said, oh, well, the budget has lots of great things, Rolston, so we got to support the budget. At the time, I'm like, yeah, but hold on, guys. That's the old school way. I'm a younger member. If I agree with the government on the budget, I might as well walk the aisle and go and sit and be their backbench. I'm not supporting the budget. And I'm going to tell the country why I'm not supporting the budget, because I believe we have better policy positions across everything to make a bigger impact and a better impact for Caymanians. So I'll never forget, 14-1. Budget passed 14-1.
And you were?
The no.
Mr. Popular.
So, and those sort of small but defining moments meant a lot to me, because for me it was about being the youngest member, but standing up, right? And saying, you know what? No, I'm not going to start. I'm not just going with the status quo. I'm not going with how they used to do things that everybody just sings kumbaya and supports the budget. So
Stick a pin about standing up. Just a little fast forward to today, just before we go back. What is your position on the, I guess, well, now the TCCP when they left cabinet during, I guess, what it was, December or when or
no, it would have been
November?
before that. Yeah, it would have been
November?
before that. I can't have a position. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened in cabinet. I don't know what happened in their cabinet and their caucus. What I can say is that certainly anyone that looks at my legislative history will know that I've never been afraid to stand alone, right? In 2001, it was a difficult decision to change the government. In 2013, it was a very difficult decision to walk away from my own party that I helped found in 2001.
Right.
But, my parents raised me that, hey, those were material points in time. So if you have to stand alone, you do it. You stand alone and then you rebuild, right?
So,
Costed me my seat, but hey,
yeah.
I'd rather at that point have stood alone and do what I knew in my heart based on the information in front of me at that time to be the right or better choice, better decision, and I did that. But history has a way of curing a lot of things, and it's so interesting that now a lot of people who lived through that look on and look at me and they say, "Raul, you know what? Listen, man."
That's typically
We
what
support-
happens, though. In the moment, emotions are high.
Yeah,
Clarity is not there.
Yeah.
Understanding can come later, and that's typically what happens with things. So 2009, your government's in. What made you get that Ministry of Education, which you are famous and known for?
So my very first campaign speech, I'll never forget it. Very, very first campaign speech, I opened with education, education, education.
Why was that so important for you?
Because I always saw education as a great social equalizer. I always knew that I was not in that position. I didn't become the youngest ever elected member for West Bay because I was just, this super awesome person, which I am, not just joking. It was about the public education system and what I took advantage of. I took advantage of a great public education system at the time, and I always thought that a great public education system was a great social equalizer, where I could go from someone whose mother cleaned for a living, cleaned condos, cleaned private homes, cleaned office buildings, and my father was an old seaman who was now in Cayman as a painter and not the artist type, painting walls, painting people's homes, and being able to then graduate from university, become a certified public accountant, and now had been having the privilege of now sitting to represent my district and my country. I wanted to ensure that future generations were going to have a system that could help them. Now, parents in their home is critically important,
Right.
but the system can make a huge
Has to work.
difference.
I just want, because a lot of people think education is not the worst, but the most difficult one because it's the most thankless one, and it's the one that you don't see results in immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So people just think even though you made changes, because results are not immediate,
Yeah.
that means you failed.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are scared to take on that ministry because it's not like one of the sex ministries like tourism or even maybe
Work, so you can build
sports.
roads and
yeah,
sports, you can host events.
yeah, right. It's one of the ones you really have to grind, and you don't get any real praise for it ever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, you want to take that on is pretty commendable.
No, I having lived through it, I saw gaps in the system where it failed my friends. Right, I can remember we used to have an old system in Cayman called the National Achievement Test, and we lived through that as an individual. And I know other people who in my year group who were very, very smart, and then all of a sudden in high school they're in set 3, I'm like, no, hold on. Something's wrong here. And of course, when you're in high school, when you're a teenager, we're in sixth form, we're in fourth form, fifth form, sixth form, you're always talking about these things because we got all the solutions, right? And so I can remember us talking about a lot of stuff as friends. And I just kept locked away in my memory all of those frustrations that we, especially when I was in sixth form, those of us who were in sixth form looking back and talking about things in Cayman, talking about our own experiences. I locked them away and said, you know what? If ever I have an opportunity, these are the things I'm going to change. And I never forgot those things, and I stayed true to them.
So when you became minister, what were some of the, I guess, the key initiatives that you wanted to, or that you did change at that time or implement?
The first and I think the most lasting one is this Cayman Islands Further Education Center. First of all, 15 plus, you're still a child.
Right.
And for us to have a system that's built in the British system, but it doesn't have further education built in, it doesn't have TechVoc pathways built in, it doesn't have apprenticeships built in. It was a cliff system, right? You get to the very edge. People like me who got enough O levels, we went on to sixth form. We soared.
Right.
We did extremely well. What about my friends? All my friends had to go and get a job. 15, 16-year-old kids having to now go out and get a job and try to make their way in the world when you're a child. And so for me, I said, we have to systemize resets. We got to give people a second chance. And that was the first phase of SciFec, right? Initially, it was about resets. It was about making sure that if a kid didn't take things serious enough, initially you failed math or English, and that's holding you back, you could get some you could reset those subjects. You could actually stay in the system, reset those subjects without having to have the pressures of being at work. And that important second chance could give you a real second chance at life, right? Sadly, SciFec has not materialized into the big vision, the big picture vision for SciFec. That was one. The other one
is there still opportunity there to groom SciFec into maturing? Yeah.
Oh yes. If you look at my manifesto, I think the two areas that has to be continued to have the next spend of education dollars is SciFec. SciFec needs to become the national trade school for Cayman. It has to become that, because that then gives all Caymanians a real pathway beyond tertiary.
Right.
Because right now, yes, you get a second chance and you get to do a BTech, but then there's no real support to get you work ready, to get you to be that next plumber, to be that next graphic artist or something else that you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree to be extremely competent at, right? And then early childhood. I had the privilege of going through a private school back then, Miss Iz's.
Is this where you made the age? Was it 4?
Yes. Good memory. That's right. So what happened was, because a lot of primary schools ran out of space, successive governments just didn't build more classrooms. They dropped reception, which to me made no sense. Absolutely no sense. Everybody knows and acknowledges the biggest and the most pronounced growth of a human being is 0 to 5. If you look incrementally.
Each year is a huge leap.
Yeah. Incrementally,
Right.
Humans grow the most in those early years. And so very early on in my term, I declared that early childhood care and education was going to be the top priority for the government, along with SciFec. And so we went to various primary schools that simply didn't have the classrooms, and we built buildings just to make sure we could house reception. Because one of the real complaints that I had gotten from teachers in primary 1 was so many children were coming unprepared, that they were spending the first term into the second term just getting children ready to learn. And so picture being almost at the end of year 1 and you're still catching up. Well, then what's going to happen? When will you ever catch up? And so a lot of our children were falling behind from primary 1.
Right.
And so, yeah, having all these great interventions in high school was just way too late. And so, yeah, we put the rubber. I just put the shoulder to the grind and went and back then we had a tough budget situation because the country was not compliant with our own law.
That was,
so we had the public management and finance law.
And the mother came down and beat us.
Yep. And so we had to get permission. And so I managed to convince when we went up to get the budget approved, we managed to convince the FCO officials to not only allow us to finish off Clifton Hunter, which when we took office, 38 million had been spent. So we had to finish that school. We couldn't walk away from $38 million that was in the ground. But we also convinced them to do the primary schools projects.
So what was the nail in the coffin at the time that stopped the John Gray project?
Money.
That was it.
It was funding.
Yeah.
Right. It was funding.
Because you inherited the school was being built right during the transition.
Yep.
And obviously, then what exactly did any building take place? Construction take place during your tenure?
Sure. So what happened was we had to make choices. All right. And so we took the decision that we had to finish a school. Clifton Hunter was so much more advanced in terms of the buildings. They were like $38 million already spent. John Gray, I think, had only spent like around 12 million. So the project itself was just so much more advanced.
Was the need just that much greater to have kids able to go to school over in the Eastern Districts?
Right. And so we also looked on and we said, hold on, from a traffic and a life experience perspective, let's finish the school. A, it's much further advanced. B, now we can finally have kids not having to come all the way into town. And so we looked at that and said, yeah, this one just makes the most sense. So given the constraints that we had at the time, budgetary wise, that's what we're allowed to do. But we also budgeted enough to actually close in whatever buildings that we had and try to protect the investment at John Gray. And so that's what was spent at
One
the
of
time.
the things I remember that was, I don't know if it was controversial, but it was talked about a lot, was the open classroom concept. Can you explain that?
So there's lots of educational learning systems around the world, right? And every learning system has to be about the society that you're in. And so the then government got sold a bag of goods that we should go back to having.
So this was like a contractor that or advised the government.
This was an independent advisor out of the UK.
Okay.
Who had done some advice to some schools in South Korea and a couple of places like that. Clearly, how you could build and have schools operate in a very, very different society like South Korea than Cayman is night and day. And one of the biggest worries that teachers had and parents had was, how are we going to reverse this? Because the buildings were so advanced at Clifton Hunter. So what we did was we hired a company that specialized in acoustics. We hired a furniture company that specialized in space management, and what you could actually do to actually break those spaces up to get it closer to some of the more traditional learning spaces that we had. Of course, the science teachers immediately came with their, signs of revolt, saying we are not teaching art and science in the same spaces. Thank you very much. So we allocated differing spaces for art, and they were very happy with that. And so, yeah, we had some wild concepts that may have worked in other societies.
But it wasn't right for us.
It wasn't going to work in Cayman. It just wasn't right for us.
You were faced with a tough decision at the time, and the country was at extreme odds where you had to do the vote of no confidence.
Yeah.
What was that period of time like? I remember everybody took off work that day to go attend the LA.
Yeah, it was packed. You know, you look at all the information in front of you. You're sitting in cabinet. You have a part that you have to answer to. For me, you know, when it came down that it looked a whole lot more like personalities versus the country, that's where I said, you know, nah, I can't go this route. Cost it what it may. And
How much of your constituents were angry at you?
70%. 70% easily. So
It's a tough thing, you know. It was a tough position to be in.
tough times, tough thing, lots of friendships involved, lots of family involved.
Right.
But for me, it was made easy because I having looked at all the information, I said, with the information in front of us, this is the route we should go. There was a huge split of opinion within the party. And so we were seen as the five renegades. And so we left, resigned en masse. We were given caretaker government status. And we basically...
What does that mean?
That means you don't have a true majority. So similar to what's happening right now.
Okay.
Right? The government don't have a majority in the parliament, so you can't pass major legislation. But everybody agreed, look, let's just limp along and get to the elections. But, you know, a lot of that decision was made a lot easier. And this is where education and being experienced and having options come in, right? I looked at life and I said, I'm a CPA. I don't have any major ethical or other controversies that have ever followed me in my political life. And so I knew I was going to be okay. Make the tough decision because you can go back and be a private citizen and support your family and survive. So I went back to being a consultant.
I was gonna say, were you ever? Did you ever go back into the private sector though, like for an actual corporation during that time?
No.
Or you just remained a consultant? Okay.
Yeah. I looked on, and you know, you look at that old life, and were there temptations? Yeah, there were some temptations, but you know, I took 6 months off. As old people would say, I was doing nothing and piling it up. And so that was 6 months just to clear my head, because I went from 28 years old being elected to now I'm 41 years old, and I'm saying, what next? And so I said, you know what, let's take some time off, defrag, get the head clear, think through what my next steps would be. I talked to a bunch of friends, lots of old colleagues, and I said, you know what, there's a space out there for doing some good, solid consulting. Took the opportunity, went out and did that on my own.
So you're running for West Bay North as an independent.
Yeah.
Why not join the party now, given the people's kind of apprehension to independence now?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question. I think people's apprehension, I'm confident. People's apprehension is they don't want to see a loose coalition running the country that is led purely by independents. For me, when I was making this decision late last year, there was only one party around, the Progressives. I didn't have any interest in joining the Progressives. And since then, two new parties have sprung up.
Right.
For me, I think they have...
You never had anybody pick up the phone, call you, been like, you interested?
Yeah.
There
There was some conversations like that. And so, again, I looked on and I was like, I kind of just felt like some of it felt more like a margin of convenience. And so I said, you know what? Stay true to yourself. Like 2013, when I took that decision to not go back to the corporate world and just hang out my own shingle, I said, you know what? Trust and have faith. The second thing was I had already started to move around West Bay North and talk to people, talk to actual West Bay North voters. And people just said to me consistently, Rolston, with your experience, run on your own. Yeah. Run on your own, and at the end of it, you can fit seamlessly into and provide a solid plank in any new administration. And so that's why I wound up taking that decision. I just didn't want to simply, less than 6 months before an election, be a part of, coming out and saying, "Oh, I'm now a part of a party," just to say I was.
You think it was, I guess, well, actually, no, you think. I guess the people's next logical question is who you're willing to work with if you are put back into office.
And that's another reason why I was convinced, and my convictions were absolute 100% at that point, that running independent was the right decision, because instead of boxing myself in, run independent, and the country is going to decide. The country is going to decide all 19 seats. Look on at that point, and if people trust you enough to elect you, they're going to trust your judgment enough to be a part of what is going to be a solid government. But I've made two commitments. One, I'm coming back to my committee and the district about whatever decision I make. And secondly, because generally speaking, I haven't found anyone in Cayman that believes that there's any party that's going to get to 10 seats. Most people generally feel no one's going to get to 10. So if no one's going to get to 10, again, I said to myself, well, then why am I going to try and join someone from now versus looking on and being a part of a really solid administration?
You're getting in the pressure from your constituents to, you better not run with them boys over there.
You get that a lot.
I don't want to hear you say you come in running with so-and-so.
Yeah, no, you get that, right? And you know what? It comes in from so many different angles. Frankly, lots of West Bayers still don't like the progressives. We were a UDP-centric party, right? Let's face it.
Yeah.
Then you get some who look on and they don't like this party, that party. And what people have said to me very, very clearly, look, just ensure that what's put together is going to be the best possible government. And the other commitment I've made, which was a huge mistake that was made in 2021, huge mistake. If you're going to form a coalition and you're serious about governance, you have to have a coalition agreement. And the agreement isn't just about a few of us in a room, 18 of us.
You feel that's why they failed ultimately?
That was a big part of it. Like you have to take all the major areas. Education, what's the coalition's top 10 priorities? Healthcare, what's your top 10 priorities? Agree that up front. In other words, a mini manifesto.
But don't you feel like there was too many clashing ideas for them to actually form that properly?
Not if they were going to be serious about governance. You're talking about 11 people or 12 people.
Yeah, but there were some big, strong forces amongst them that have, their own ideas of how they want things to be. I mean, I don't know this.
And I suspect that
I don't know this, but I imagine it, right?
And I suspect that there's going to be some strong forces again. I'm running on a manifesto, and for me, that night of election, it's all about sitting with people and saying, look, what are the priorities?
So you want to see if it lines up with your manifesto, and that's how you make your decision?
That's how I make my decision, and hopefully that then ensures that we come out very quickly to the country with a coalition agreement, right? We have a week.
Right.
Our constitutions and the swearing-in process being a week later was actually built around the fact that Cayman historically didn't have parties.
You're gonna get one what did it say? One government was formed over a pot of stew turtle.
That was 2000. Good memory. That was 2000. Yeah, that was something else, boy. But nah, it seriously, like, big egos have to get checked at the door for the good of the country. You have to form a coalition of government for two reasons. A coalition agreement for two reasons. One, it provides certainty and transparency for the public. As important, if not more, you're able to go to the government admin building across ministries, and chief officers know what their policy priorities should be. Because in all fairness, I've heard lots of talk these days of, boy, it isn't like the way when you were Minister Rolston, and I always say, why? And it always comes down to the same thing. It's very, very clear that chief officers themselves are scratching their heads saying, What are my priorities? And so to me, that's why it's going to be crucially important. But let's be honest. Cayman is a small place. Every one of us accepts public education, healthcare, immigration. These are all big picture issues that all of us know are issues. And so really, coming up with an agreement like that is not as difficult a task as a lot of people will want to make it out to be. You just got to get the work done.
Yeah.
You just got to do it.
So speaking of the big topic issues now, let's talk about housing, the housing crisis now, where I guess the idea is that, it has become very difficult for Caymanians, in particular 20-year-olds now. It is no longer feasible for them to acquire a property just because they've been priced out the market with the level of wages that they are, I guess, poised to make coming out of college now. I don't imagine it's any easy feat, but, I guess this is what we pay you guys the big bucks for.
Well, let's put it this way. If you're putting yourself forward to be in this hot seat and do have a plan that can actually work, then you shouldn't put yourself in the hot seat, right? And so for me, it's when it comes to housing, it's about a multi-pronged approach. If you look at my manifesto, one of the things that I'm saying immediately, the next government has to pass an immigration transition bill. And a part of that transition bill is to remove the section in the point system that says if you spend $500,000 on a home, you get 30 points. Because guess what that's done to the housing market? Artificial demand has been...
Everyone's saving up their money.
Because all non-Caymanians who are looking on, who want to get PR, are looking on and saying 30 points, $500,000, let's go find a property for $500,000. So whereas 15 years ago, the actual demand and supply curve was very different because a lot of non-Caymanians weren't looking to get a property in Cayman until they were pretty sure they could acquire PR. But once you got 30 points for it, which puts you well on the way to getting PR, then lots of people...
But are we too far past that now to I guess bring the prices back down to somewhat of a reasonable...
You're right. Absolutely. That one item won't do it. It has to be multi-pronged. The government, the country has to accept that we need the East-West Arterial for a number of reasons. The East-West Arterial is going to be critically important just for the lifestyle of Caymanians who have to live from Prospect and above. It is an absolute disaster just trying to get into town to get to work, right? I can remember those days when I was in West Bay when we used to be choked off and it took us an hour and a half to get to Georgetown when I was a young professional. So why is that road? And it has to be built on the most environmentally secure plan. Apparently there's three different...
The three options, yeah.
We have to go with the most environmentally sensible route, but we need to build it. It's going to do another thing. It's going to open up a lot of new lands. Demand and supply. If you open up more lands, it reminds me of the early 90s when tons of West Bayers moved out of West Bay to go live up in Savannah and the Newlands area, because land costs in West Bay had started to go up dramatically. People were doing subdivisions up in Savannah, and you could get a piece of land up there for sometimes 30-40% less.
Right.
And so Caymanians, a lot of West Bayers just simply said, hold on.
But you have to make the land attractive with the highway, because if
That's right.
people are going to be reluctant to want to live up there if
That's
they
right.
have to spend 3 hours trying to get into town.
Exactly. We have to accept, we have to really embrace the fact that in order to move forward, a lot of times in the most feasible and the most sensible way, change has to come. And one of the changes that I foresee, if I'm going to put on if I was to say, I have a little crystal ball, what Grand Cayman is going to look like, a lot of people are going to be moving out to the eastern districts. That's just a reality.
It's happening. Bodden town's like not the fastest growing district.
And I think this is going to go even further east, because if you have a highway and you literally can get to town in 25 minutes, then it becomes a value proposition. Then people are going to look on and be like, yeah, I'll live out there.
What do you think we should do about Hurley's Roundabout then? Because that's the most painful part. I think even more painful than the highway itself is the idea of what the hell to do with that roundabout.
Yeah, so we gonna have a few. Let's take 2 steps back. Just about every major city has some level of traffic at the peak periods, right? I don't think anybody should ever get it twisted that
they're gonna have a free ride into town every day.
Every day, right? Yeah. There could be some high traffic at the early mornings, in the evenings, but if you actually open up the eastern districts via the east-west arterial, first 2 things happen. People then realize we don't all have to jump into our cars at the same time and compete to get to Georgetown, because we have more lanes in the eastern districts to actually make it down to that roundabout. And the truth is, if you look at the overall plan and how they actually already created 2 6-lane highways, I think
they're expanding it.
Yes,
yeah.
if you look at how the entire system is supposed to work together, I think it's going to be a lot easier. Another thing that has been a vexing issue for a long time has been the connector from the roundabout that's near Agape to Walker's Road. Also, another survey is out about what busing would look like for private schools, right? And so sometimes government is going to have to use a hammer to really enforce certain things for the greater good. And so that may get to the point where we start saying, look, we can't continue doing the same old, which means everyone jumping in their private car to take every child to school.
Speaking of government making hard decisions, what do you feel about government making a hard decision in regards to public bus system?
I don't think you can make just like the cost of property and acquiring property means we're going to make some hard decisions around how government uses infrastructure funds on Grand Cayman to open up more lands and open up our country that solves a multiple of issues. The same thing has to happen with public transport. I'm in New York. I went 2+ years, never owned a car.
Yeah.
Got home. We decided we're going to have 1 car.
But does it have to be a system where the government is now putting these guys on salary so they're not all competing and racing back into town? I know they probably may not like to hear that, but that way you ensure they're not skipping stops or they're not taking shortcuts and the usual shenanigans that may happen.
So what I've said in my manifesto is that government is going to have to put together some form of private or public-private partnership that forces the public bus network to be a single entity. But give the owners of routes the first right of refusal to invest in that entity. Because I think if you own routes right now, right, if you own 2 or 3 routes and some people are leasing routes out and this sort of thing, you shouldn't be just disadvantaged right away. I think the Caymanians that own those routes should have the first opportunity. And I think if you do that, what you do is, all of a sudden, if you have buses that have technology on them, so you can swipe a card, you can buy a card, and you can actually have what looks like a modern transportation system.
Right.
Because at that point, you're not competing for the population. So you don't have guys, forget about skipping stops. What's happening in Cayman is guys just don't even follow their route.
They just go into where they think people are.
That's right. So a classic one was, and this is what I was getting to when I first got home from New York. At the time, you had a situation where I get home and we're like, you know what, we only need 1 car. We got buses. And, you get home and blisters are on the heels because the bus decided they were going to turn down Watercourse Road instead of going up Northwest Point Road because they wanted to chase the population. And that's still happening today.
Right.
If we don't do, as you've quite rightly said, if we don't make this a properly organized single entity where all buses are on one network, reliable schedules, of course, you need some road improvements for those reliable schedules, so that people can then look on and say, we got a credible alternative.
What do you think about the hop-on, hop-off buses that they were doing for a while? They had the app and they had the stops, and you could take it free and go to the hospital, supermarket, whatever, do your errands.
So I think those sorts of things should be built in. I think all that should get built into the system, right? I think if you give that to a single entity and say, look, for the 7 Mile Beach corridor and the central business district of Georgetown, provide in there movement around, because remember, in a perfect world, you're going to have routes coming from East End, North Side, Bodden Town, West Bay, different parts of West Bay,
right,
and they all are going to get you to Cayman Bay, Georgetown, right? Your point is, what about just movement around? What about if I
because
just
a lot
want to
of
go to
old
lunch?
people used to love it to go to the pharmacy, go to the supermarket, and they can get dropped back off close to their house and walk home, no problem.
Or, let me give you another example.
All right.
You work in Cayman Bay and you want to just go up to Lobster Pot for lunch, you're gonna jump in your car, right?
Absolutely.
So if you had a couple of quote unquote localish routes,
Right,
built in on top of the main routes, then that becomes a part of the system. One of the things that I'm proposing for West Bay North, that's specifically, West Bay more generally, to be honest, is around banking, getting to the clinic, getting to the pharmacy, and getting to the bank out in Centennial Towers, right? Is actually coming up with a system where you have a purely locally driven type of setup where we don't increase the public service by dozens of people, but you get a couple of cross-trained people. We've gotten a lot of complaints around illegal dumping, poaching, seniors can't get around. And so my thought process is, if you got a cadre of 5-6 people who alternate what they do each day, but one of the roles that they play is simply moving people around districts. And I think that's important in every district, because how do Boddentowners get to the Boddentown Clinic? How do East End residents get to the East End Clinic? How do Northside residents get to the Northside Clinic? And I think immediately you got to try to do something about it, but long term, you do need to have what would be little shuttles around the districts. But again, if you build it into an overall system, and that then allows the operator to basically have a well-oiled machine. But this is going to take a lot of effort.
Oh, it's a enormous.
It sounds good in theory.
I don't
but it's a lot of effort.
I don't envy the person who's in charge of that at all.
That's going to take a lot of commitment and effort.
I guess it's a hot topic as of late because of some incidents that have happened, and is immigration. And I saw a proposal that you had in your manifesto that said you wanted to put a freeze on permits for, was it 24 months?
Well, a freeze on permanent residence.
Permanent residency
and Caymanian status.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If you look at the manifesto, and you have to look at all these points as a suite of legislation, right? My proposal is the next government immediately needs to implement an immigration transition bill. 7-year hard rollover period needs to be reimplemented. A 24-month freeze on any permanent residence and Caymanian status grants by tenure. The 30 points for the 500,000 needs to be either eliminated or reduced to, say, 5 points, which makes it very, very unattractive. Persons married to Caymanians, if you want to get Caymanian status, you don't get it until year 15.
After being married.
After being married for 15
but
years.
But then you still allowed to stay married, but you don't get the status until 15. Okay.
And you get your RARC so you can work and support your family, but it's renewable. and you're not free of immigration restriction of control, because another loophole that's happening is people are getting their RERC, and 12 months later, they're then applying to be registered. After getting registered, they then go get a British passport. So we have tons of people in our community floating around with a British passport that don't even have Caymanian status. 7 years later, you get Caymanian status, then you get a Cayman passport. It's a mess. There's loophole after loophole after loophole. So in my mind, along with doing that, you immediately appoint an immigration review team that will then come back to government, and you give them a 6 month.
Is this within government civil service, or this is like industry experts?
So this would be, so I sat on the first immigration review team. And so how we structured that particular review team, we had the chief immigration officer sitting. We had a secretary from the immigration department. We had 2 legislators. So we had one from government and one from the opposition. And then we had 2 persons from the private sector.
Okay.
And so it was well balanced, and we all worked diligently. And that 7-year rollover was in that first law. But it's been changed.
Right.
Because the legislation, especially over the last decade, has just become completely bastardized. And so now it's gone from 7 years to everyone getting the opportunity to apply for PR. We can't continue that sort of madness. This country needs to have an opportunity to breathe. This is about population. This is about opportunities for Caymanians. If we're not going to take a tough stand and continue to say, you know what, Cayman is just for anyone, then we're going to continue to disadvantage Caymanians, especially young Caymanians who want to come back from university, do a great thing, be able to buy a piece of land
and have make to Cayman, keep smiling because
it make Cayman their home.
Shana is dancing in the background.
Because and the other thing that I'm proposing is this whole, one of the things that experience has taught us, once you get tough on immigration, having a single country with 2 systems just doesn't work. And so what happened was on 1 January of 2004, when we passed that first immigration bill, that had a lot of the same provisions I'm now talking about that have been changed in the last decade.
So you think the provisions have then gotten more lenient?
Yeah. The law went from 7 years to, let's make it 8 and let's make everyone apply. But the boards are going to be so efficient that the boards are going to deny work PR, and that'll roll people over by a board process. Now we're backed up by thousands of applications. That theory could never have worked, and that's where we're backed an immigration crisis. But we have to ensure that there's a rollover in the public service as well, because what'll happen is we'll have history repeat itself. 2004, when we did this, people looked on and said, roll over in the private sector, let me go get a government job.
I saw that you had that in there as well as provisions into people that enroll themselves into government jobs because they don't need work permits, right?
That's right. That's the issue.
And they don't have a rollover period.
That's right. And so we have to close that loophole. We have to close that loophole. Now, what I've also said in my manifesto is differing agencies will have the opportunity to come before the Parliament. Note that I said the Parliament, not the Cabinet. In the old system and the old way of thinking in Cayman, if you went down this road, it would be that they would apply to Cabinet, and Cabinet would then agree, yeah, HSA, you don't need to have a rollover for your doctors and nurses because you've made a good argument that you needed to be exempt, right? Under my construct, a committee of the whole House, which would be led by whoever is the minister responsible for border control, he'd chair that committee. Those public servants will have to come down in a public setting in the Parliament and explain to the Parliament, which is by extension the representatives of the people of this country, why they should have exemptions.
I was going to ask about that because there are situations where, because you do have to hire some outside talent, whether it be some very specialized areas, scientists, whatever it is, that we just don't have the resources here to fill those positions, which are legitimate. So I'm glad that you do have provisions in there. It's not just a you couldn't just go with a complete sledgehammer, but you got to close that gap. The other thing that I'm proposing is that we return to a system where
Any Caymanian who's on a government scholarship, if you don't have a private sector job lined up, you are then enrolled for national service, i.e., some form of bonding to government. Now, not a guaranteed job. The reason this was discontinued was that up through about 2002, I think it was when this was ended, you found that the civil service was just artificially creating jobs, and the civil service was getting bloated.
Just because they were accepting all of...
Yes. So most people were going off on a government scholarship. We were creating jobs in the government service, but work permits were growing in the private sector. And so government has to be serious about the immigration regime and the fact that we are not going to continue down this laissez-faire approach when it comes to work permits. I use myself as an example. When I got my scholarship, back in the 60s, in the mid-70s, the then government told accounting firms, you cannot have work permits for trainee or staff accountants. That's your entry-level position when you get out of university. No legislation was ever created for this, but the firms knew it. So what did the firms do? They all came to sixth form and found scholarship recipients. They all came and said, well, you know what? Government has said we can't have staff accountants. That means we got to go find Caymanians who can fill these roles. So they came to sixth form.
You're seeing that quite a bit now. Is a lot of the big firms are fighting over high school talent now. A lot of these high school kids actually kind of have a lot of say into who gives them a scholarship and where they go.
But we need to have that same approach and that same level of competition across the economy.
Right.
Because on the professional side, that's happening, and that's great for the kids who are in that space. But what about the kids who wants to be an HVAC technician?
Right.
What about the kids who want to work for a private bank? We're letting murder happen out there in those other sections, where other sectors of the economy, where work permits are just hand over fist, and it's like, oh yeah, you can always get them, right? And so, am I proposing that we hurt the economy? No. But if we continue, history has shown us, if we continue to do what we're doing, we're just going to set Caymanians up for failure. And so we have to be tough on immigration.
You say the word Caymanians. That word comes up in your manifesto.
Yeah.
What does Caymanian mean to you?
So I, of course, I'm talking about Caymanians of right, or generational Caymanians, right? A person who at the time of their birth had a Caymanian parent, a Caymanian grandparent. I'm not going to apologize to anyone for that. Every country sets what their nationality definition looks like. For too long in Cayman, we've gotten browbeaten so much about this immigration issue that people all of a sudden made entitled Caymanians a bad thing. It's a bad thing to say Caymanian is a qualification and you don't need to show up to work and you can't get fired and you're just going to get paid and you don't have to work. That's what a lot of people use. That's the definition that a lot of people use for entitlement. I can't go to the United States. I can't go to Australia. I can't go to Belize. I can't go to any other country and have any entitled benefits. I'm a Caymanian, so yes, I am an entitled Caymanian. I am entitled to have an advantage in my country.
I will say it's kind of funny. I've had conversations with some expat friends of mine, and sometimes they argue. It's like, why is it that we shouldn't all get the same things? I'm like, because you have the option to go home and have benefits there. Like, why is it that, like, this is my only home?
Yeah.
Why don't I deserve to have some extra benefits that you don't get?
And flip it on its head. If they're from Canada, I just can't go to Canada and get all the benefits in Canada. If they're from, wherever they're from, they are citizens of that country and have those benefits, and we don't have those benefits when we go there.
In your manifesto, you wanted to clear up or redefine what it means to be called a Caymanian.
Yeah, a generational Caymanian.
Right.
So everybody else would be a status holder.
A status holder.
But Bermuda used to have a thing called belonger in their immigration legislation.
It's very hard to. You can't really get Bermuda status, can you? Or Bermudian status. They've made it very difficult, I think. Well,
Yeah, and if you look at my manifesto, it will be very difficult. And it should be very difficult given how fast our population has grown over the last decade. The country needs, in my mind, Cayman needs an opportunity to breathe, and we need to rebalance where this country has gotten
Speaking
to.
about where the country is going, we have, I guess, they've been doing the rounds, and I guess some industry experts have put together Plan Cayman or such. You have any thoughts, ideas, or I guess expressions about that?
I kind of like my tough stance on immigration in my manifesto. And I kind of like the fact that what it does is it sets a line in the sand. It says that we are going to stand for a rebalance in our country. Where are we going to get to in the next decade? What is it going to look like for my kids? What is it going to look like for my future grandkids? And if you're not willing to look on and say 10, 20, 25 years, which goes very much like that.
The older you get, the faster it goes.
That's right.
Tell me about it.
So we got to make some tough decisions now for the long term, right? It's sort of like that person that gets diagnosed with diabetes. So are you going to continue just to eat sweets, not exercise, and do nothing, or you're going to do something about it? And a lot of times you just need to make big decisions in your life, lifestyle decisions that says, you know what? If I don't want my health to deteriorate very, very quickly, here's what I need to do. I need to draw a line in the sand, and here's what I'm going to do going forward. I see the same thing in Cayman. We got to draw a line in the sand, and we have to make some tough decisions.
So another tough decision, your ideas around, I know you're West Bay, but, what does Georgetown need to come back to some sort of life? I have my own biased opinions on this, but, floor is...
It's an excellent question, right? First of all, going down the road to have created a post called the town planner is good. The gentleman that occupies that post was a couple years ahead of me in school, smart, good Caymanian, committed young man. I like to draw on the experience of other places, though. There was a mayor in Tampa, Florida, who decided that Ybor City, which had become a slum. I mean, I started to go to Tampa when I was 4 years old. And by the time I was a teenager, you just didn't even want to drive through Ybor. You didn't want to drive through Ybor City. Now it's a bustling, great place, and everybody goes to Ybor to party, right? But a mayoral candidate ran on the basis that she was going to hire a professional city and urban redevelopment firm. That was their specialty. And what they then did was they worked alongside the city council to then revitalize the city. I don't think any single person can do this.
Right.
I don't think a town manager should ever be charged to singly come up with how you revitalize Georgetown. I think government needs to get serious about it. It's going to take some consultancy money, but we spend millions of dollars on consultancies that don't have any material benefit for Caymanians. So I reckon we should redirect some of that and actually come up with a real credible plan that you work closely with the private sector and landowners in Georgetown and come up with multi-use buildings, etc. We've been talking about this for decades, right?
Yeah.
We've just been talking about it. We do a little bit here, a little bit there. It's kind of hodgepodge, and it's not strategic, and it hasn't been brought together. You got to have a strategic approach to it and get the resources, get the skill sets that can help us and come up with a real plan of what Georgetown could look like. And because they'll give you that suite of products then, right? They're going to look on and say, here are the type of buildings. Here's how you got to change your planning code. Here's what you need to do to ensure that all of this can come to fruition. And that then leaves the policymakers change the legislation, and allow for it to be able to be possible. Right now, it just isn't even possible because we haven't put together a plan, a comprehensive plan that can work.
Okay. So, assuming after all that you've said, I would assume that if you were given the opportunity, you would be more than happy to take up the post of Minister of Education once again, if you're inside the room over that pot of turtle stew.
Well, listen, how I look at it is absolutely I would take up the post. Absolutely. Absolutely. But what is more important to me is looking at what a coalition is going to look like and ensure that we're putting together a coalition that is going to have the biggest positive impact. And so if that means that I need to use my finance skills and do something slightly different in the cabinet, I'm more than open to that, right? I'm not going to go into this, with blinders on. This is about Cayman. This isn't just about what I would want. This is about what's going to be best for Cayman, because, we need to have the best possible government put together with people strategically placed in ministries that they can have the biggest impact. But most importantly, working together as a government, not 8 governments.
I just wanted to say, I think, for a lot of people that fall through the cracks and stuff, that find life hard and are trying to make their way up, everybody, I think the greatest story in humanity is a redemption story. And even, when you slip, fall, go through trials, tribulations, what it's like having that battle with yourself to overcome that. I wanted to ask you, despite everything, that you may have gone through, what was that process like for you of the self-awareness, the growth, and coming back to where you are now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know what it came down to? It simply came down to looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror and looking on and being real about what was looking back at you. And I just said, you know what? Hey, where would my kids want me to be? How am I going to be the best possible version of myself for them? What would make my deceased mother proud of me, right? And so it really, once I just looked myself in the mirror and said, enough's enough, right?
Everybody has a kind of that moment,
yeah,
like a hard moment for yourself.
You just got to stop the crap. You just do what you have to do in life, right? And it's all about putting your hand up and being self-aware, but also being strong enough to accept, hey, what do I need? What else do I need to add to myself, right?
Did you reach out to anybody?
Coach? Yeah. Life coaches is a big thing these days, right? I mean, a lot of firms even demand that all partners in certain levels in the firm, they don't even make it optional now, because they know that in the new world that we live in, with all the technology and all the pressures that come with it, most of us do need to ensure that we're keeping ourselves balanced, right? And we're moving forward and being completely positive from our own mental health, etc. And so for me, it was about just looking on, and I said, you know what? I need to add some tools to my toolbox, right? And I went to grief counseling.
What was that? What was that experience like?
That,
because a lot of people feel like, they're scared of, I guess, exposing themselves out to someone else.
Yeah. There's
especially for us guys.
Yeah. There's always that stigma, right? But as I said, you got to be strong enough to do it. We've been trained to think that, it's weak to do it, but it's being strong enough, right? And absolutely positive, I would say, tell anyone, when it comes to how life's challenges come at you, whether it's just the day-to-day interactions at work, whether it's stuff in your marriage, whether you've gone through a miscarriage, you lost a child, you lost an aunt, an uncle, a mother, or whatever, every one of us handles it different. We all handle it differently, right? And there's a lot of times where you get into a point in life where you're just not handling it well.
Yeah.
And you just then got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and say, hey, what are you going to do differently? And that was it for me. And after that, life just became easy again. When I say easy, easy in quotes.
Yeah.
Because at that point, it's like, okay.
You're fighting yourself at that point, right?
Yeah. Because that's what a lot of us do, you know. We put all this pressure on ourselves to be X version that you want the outside world to see and your friends to see, your kids to see, and you don't then actually pour enough effort into yourself, you know, and it really into yourself. And a lot of times the easy way to do it is to jump on a bike, get some exercise, go to the gym, get some exercise. But the harder way.
That's what they say whenever you get a heartbreak. It's time to go pump some iron.
Yeah. You know, and so that for me just became what was the most important thing that I've done, you know, over the last decade for myself. And I tell people all the time, I'm the most resilient version of myself ever, because I fell down and skinned my knee. I remember that pain.
Absolutely.
And so the knee's never going to get skinned again, you know.
Calm waters never made a good sailor. Hey.
Ever.
So, you know, before we wrap it up, now I wanted to ask you on the campaign trail now.
Yeah.
You have the lovely manager with you here, making sure that we in check now.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's been different about this campaign for you that you've done differently or experienced differently? Anything took you by surprise this campaign?
Let's pick up where we just left off. Doubt has been removed from people, right? People now look on and they're like, okay, this is the Rolston I got people who are like my age. I got people that's slightly older who look on and they're like, okay, this is the Rolston that we believed in and we elected at that 24 years ago at age 28. On top of that, I now have a world of experience. I've had the pleasure and the honor of representing West Bay. I've now had 12 years of not being elected, being on the other side of the fence, being in the private sector. I've had the benefit of now just absolutely positively becoming the strongest, most resilient version of myself. And so people have looked on and seen a very, very different Rolston and a very different approach. And so that's made things a lot different in this campaign. Now, as it relates to the actual district and the constituency, obviously one man, one vote has changed a lot of things because you're not running in a broad, wide, open West Bay.
You feel that could be improved, or do you like one man, one vote, how it is?
I think it's a disaster for Cayman. I think it's a disaster. So it's been great for politicians.
Just for transparency. I was on the one man, one vote committee.
I mean, I don't know what your experience is now. I mean, I don't know if you still like it, but
I appreciate it. I will say I've been thinking about it a lot over the years because it's been a lot of time. I myself have grown a lot since then. I mean, I was in my late 20s when I was, about that. In principle, it has, it has its perks and stuff, but on a whole, you do really have to look at how it affects the whole landscape of the island as well. And I think there can be adjustments made. I don't know if we go back to the old system or we do some
sort of hybrid.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things, right? When you look at it in its purest sense, it sounds and feels so sexy. What people didn't appreciate was how it works in a small community where you don't have 2, 3, 4 million people, and constituencies are made up of 5, 10,000 people, right? Where you have to appeal to a broad base of voters, because the better candidate is going to be the person who has to appeal to more people. If I only got to convince the 4 of us in this room, now if you add 300 people to that mix, I got to sharpen myself more than likely. I have to come a lot sharper if I'm going to convince the majority of them, because now I've got to get the 151. And I think that's just the how things are with humans, right? I think iron sharpens iron. The more people you have to convince, I think, is better.
Yeah.
But in my manifesto, I haven't come out and said, "Oh, let's return to what we had." What I have said is, at a minimum, we should go to dual member districts and look at BVI and consider whether or not
Bermuda has dual member as well.
But BVI still has single member.
No, Bermuda. I think has dual member.
Right, but the next concept that I'm going to bring up comes from actual BVI, where they have at-large seats. So you have a number of
much
seats.
Wider. Yeah.
So when you go and vote for your constituency, you then also vote for the candidates who have been nominated on the at-large ticket. And the at-large ticket means the entire district, the entire island votes for them. So you'd basically vote for who's going to represent your district and who you think should be that large representative.
Okay.
I think that sort of mix would be great. But getting back to your other question, some of the other changes that I've seen, generally speaking, because I'm on the other side of 30 and other side of 40, really when I demitted office 12 years ago, there is a change in the landscape, because obviously I'm now much more entrenched in what is the majority of voters. Their issues can sometimes look a lot different than younger people. They're still concerned about home ownership, education, but a lot of them are much more concerned about health care, etc., because now they're marching towards 60, 65, right? And so to have personal experience, that is interesting. But I think overall, there has been obviously a big shift in just what the overall demographics also look like, right? Because you got a lot more, for example, Cuban Caymanians, right? Who, when I was elected, a number of them could vote. They'd been in Cayman forever, right? But a lot of them were admitted to Cayman on a certificate, basically at the governor's pleasure. And a lot of them didn't actually have Caymanian status. A lot of people didn't realize that. So we literally had hundreds of people with Power, Tomlinson, and all these last names that sound very familiar to us because they came.
This was the Ghost Caymanian situation? No.
So this would have been descendants and people who were still coming home from Isle of Youth or Isle of Pine, as it was called back in the day, right? A lot of them, when they came to Cayman, once they proved they had that Cayman connection, they were just given a certificate that said you can live in Cayman and you can work anywhere. But they weren't given Caymanian status. And so they actually never voted. And so a lot more. So obviously.
So you're meeting a lot of these people.
Yes.
And
Yeah. So the landscape. That's just one example of how the landscape have changed, So
well, I want to say, if you want to give any closing words to your constituency, the people of West Bay North, and maybe just maybe if the Greater Cayman or anything before we wrap it up.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, and this is to the wider Cayman, go to the polls and vote. First of all, it's a sacred right, right? Like seriously, we used to have a real solid turnout, but over the last few years, you've seen that start to slip. Let's stop making the excuses. Oh, we don't have candidates we can identify with. If you're going to listen, you can find someone that's going to identify with your issues and how you see Cayman and where Cayman wants to be. Get involved and engaged. Vote for someone who has experience, who, as my niece likes to say, think of it as a bus and a destination, right? What bus is going to get you as close to your destination as possible. I kind of just like that analogy from the first time I ever heard her say it. And so vote for people who are going to be experienced and be able to help lead Cayman. This is not a joke thing. We're not voting for local government. We're not voting for council persons, etc., that happens in some of the bigger islands and in other countries like the US. We're voting for 19 members to go into our national parliament. We need to have people who are going to be good representatives in the district, good parliamentarians, and for those who form a part of the majority, can be effective and efficient ministers in cabinet. And for the people of West Bay North, my message is very simple. I see myself as the person who offers the best hope for proper representation, being able to be an effective parliamentarian right out of the gate, right? I like to say experience over experiments. We can't experiment around with an election. We got to have experience. We got to have people who can hit the ground running. And Cayman's in a crisis. I think that Cayman is actually not approaching the crossroads. I think in immigration, for example, we're through the crossroads. And so we need to have people who have enough life experience, enough knowledge, who are going to not just be bullied around by the private sector. Because trust me, I don't think that my manifesto, especially immigration, is going to be something that's just going to be accepted wholeheartedly. Mm-hmm. But you have to have that experience to know, stand your ground. And so I'm there. I'm here to fight for Cayman, to fight for Caymanians. I have children. I have children that range from 23 to 6 years old. So I have a lot at stake in this election, and we have to get it right. We have to get this election right. And so we need to be able to put together. So
how do people get in touch with you? How do people find you if they want to? I mean, I'm sure you probably have already knocked on their door, but if you have not.
Sure. So Rolston4WBN.ky is the website. I'm also on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. I also have developed a West Bay North number, 3230926. And so people can reach me in a multitude of ways and be able to not only see what we're up to, but also give feedback. That's the other thing that I like about how we've approached the manifesto. There's a QR code on the inside page, so you can scan that, give me your feedback. You can go on the website and give us direct feedback. As I said, we're on all the social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and you can follow along with the campaign.
All right, Mr. Anglin, Rolly. Appreciate your time.
No, thank you
once again.
It was a good conversation.
It's been real.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to the Link Up podcast. As Victor would say, if you're washing dishes at home, at work, listening to us, not doing work, we appreciate you. We love you. And until next time, this has been the Link Up.